Good morning, good afternoon, and very good evening to everyone who's joined us. On behalf of ICF Conclave India, hosted by ICF Chennai Charter Chapter, along with other India chapters, I'm Kulshum Azmi, your host for today, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us. We are really looking forward for you to be part of our session today, The Power of Systemic Team Coaching, with our esteemed panel speakers. Before we get into the topic, just wanted to give a quick heads up about what this topic is all about. To give everyone a brief introduction, systemic team coaching is fast gaining prominence in the coaching industry, and most importantly, gaining prominence because of its 360-degree approach, therefore, the achievement of team goals in a more sustainable manner. Approach includes systemic being, thinking, and doing, and allows for the team to listen for voices of all the stakeholders. Lovely, isn't it? Joining us today are the seasoned, masterful coaches to pack this concept with simplicity, as David put it across, sharing their experiences and why it works. Honored and a fan moment for me to introduce one of our very first panel speakers, Professor David Clutterberg.
Hello,
So,
everybody.
thank you, Professor David. So, looking forward to this conversation with you. To give a quick introduction about David, David is one of the early pioneers of developmental coaching and mentoring, co founder of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, author of more than 70 books, wow, including the first evidence based titles on coaching culture and team coaching. He is also a visiting professor of 4 business schools. He leads a global network of specialist mentoring and coaching training consultants, Coaching and Mentoring International. Looking forward to hear your thoughts, David, in this topic, which is
Pleasure.
your very own. And our second speaker for this conversation and the session is none other than Kathy Tracy, who holds a Guinness World Record for rowing across the Atlantic Ocean and has had a long career in the helping professions. She has a social work degree and has practiced predominantly in the UK, over time becoming a highly skilled child protection social worker and then social work supervisor and trainer. Progressing to training managers and leaders in the 90s, Kathy started her own coaching and training business over 20 years ago, working with a wide variety of executives across sectors. After 30 years abroad, she returned to New Zealand and now facilitates business owner retreats. All this in addition to designing and delivering coach training at the Systemic Coach Academy, New Zealand. She's also written a book that coaches people through an achievement methodology. Wow, thank you so much, Kathy, for coming and joining us today. And to moderate this session, we have our very own ICF Chennai chapter president, Vijay Lakshmi, whom we fondly call as Viji, an experienced management consultant, coach, master coach and mentor, and a certified systemic and team coach with over 2,950 hours of coaching experience. Her specialties include executive leadership, wellness, and conflict coaching. Working with individuals, teams, and businesses, she has a rich background in human resource law and is an accredited mediator. Viji is a coaching evangelist and a believer in the power of collective and universe connections, which we've been experiencing in the last 5 months working with her. On this note, and not taking any more time, handing over to our session speakers. And this session is sponsored by BMC. And thank you so much. Over to you, Viji, and have a great, looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kulshu. That was a very kind and generous introduction. And as you stay in the background, we also request you to just give us a sense of what's going on, so that we are all together co-creating this discussion. And I must confess, it's also a bit of a fangirl moment, not just for you, for me as well, because I am a big fan of Professor Clutterbuck's, and I also, think very highly of Kathy for all that both of them have achieved. So I'm trying to kind of also use this session to add on to my learning and become, take away lots of stuff. So David and Kathy, how are you feeling today?
Pretty good.
Yeah, great. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. And it's amazing. I'm very delighted to be with David, who's only done 69 more books than me. So I feel like we're pretty much on a par.
That's wonderful. Yes. Well, I describe myself as a compulsive scribbler, but I learn a vast amount from everybody else. And somebody reminded me this week about curiosity. And I think the thing I'm most curious about is how can I carry on learning when I'm dead?
Wow.
There must be a way.
There must be a way. I'm working on it. Yeah. So it's great to be with Kathy as well, and you, VG.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we really get into the topic, maybe a line or two about, what sort of excites you about this topic? I mean, it's not just you're not just talking about it. Both of you do deep work in this. So what attracts you to it? Why this?
Shall I go first, or do you want to go first, Kathy?
You go.
Okay. I look at the impact that we can have on the world around us. If coaching is all about making money and having a living, that's one thing. That's a profession and all the rest of it. But if coaching is a vocation about having a significant impact on the world, then we need to look at, well, how do we do that? And if we're just working one-to-one with somebody, helping them get the next stage up, helping another narcissistic executive climb one rung up, further up the corporate ladder, okay, that benefits them a bit. It might benefit the corporation or might not, depending on who they are. But it's a very limited impact. And so what we're seeing as we begin to look systemically, we look at that leader in the context of their team, we look at that leader in the context of, or that team in the context of the organization in the context of its society, and so forth. So what we're seeing now is an inexorable move away in coaching from just focusing on this very narrow, tiny bit of influence for the individual to the potential to have a real impact on the world. That's exciting.
Yeah, I often think about, and sometimes I explain this to clients, it's a bit like throwing a stone in a pool. And when you throw a stone in a pool, you get all these ripples that come out. And I think it's fair to say that we don't always know the impact we're having as systemic coaches. And I think that's a humbling thing. And it's something that we have to hold kind of lightly when we're doing this work. But I get excited because, I find out sometimes months and months afterwards an impact that has happened as a result of some team coaching. And, that's fabulous. So, sometimes it feels like I haven't made an effort for something. And then, later on somebody will say, oh yeah, and when we did that thing, I thought about this, and then this happened, and it feels like there's a momentum that gets started. So I think that's one of the really exciting things about systemic team coaching.
I noticed in the chat somebody's saying how much they like the word ripple. I just want to say that you make ripples, you don't actually change very much. You put a really big rock in and you create waves, and then you change things.
Yeah. Indeed,
Kathy knows all about that. Kathy's
that way.
That's right. So I'm sensing picking words like impact, and that's a big word, and that connects a lot with me as well. The reason I get drawn to, so I was telling somebody, it's not just a way of coaching. It's kind of in your whole being, right? And what you start off as a systemic coach, I think, transforms the way you show up in the world. It's very difficult to show up in any other way.
Yeah.
That's something that's that I'm trying to process and figure out how this thing works. But that definitely happens. it's not that you go in and do a systemic team coaching engagement and then the next day, it's kind of out of your system.
Yeah.
And I think one of the lovely things about it is, you can't unlearn it once you've learnt it. Once you start to understand the impact of systems, it's almost impossible to not see it. It's another lens that you just have to look at the world, and it's there all the time. And I think that's it's kind of one of the risks of doing this sort of work, is because once you figure out your lens into systems, then you've got it with you all the time. And it turns up not just when you're coaching, but just in your life generally. So you get this broader understanding, this ability to look from different perspectives, and I think it's hugely powerful.
And I think there's something here about the assumption that you do systemic coaching, it's just one level, but actually there's multiple layers of complexity. At every stage we get into greater complexity, and we need to have a bigger portfolio of tools and a bigger mindset to be able to see that complexity. And I quite love that there's something that comes from Wales. It's called Cynefin. It identifies simple systems, complicated systems, complex systems, and chaotic systems. Now, most coaches are not even operating at the simple systems level, and we've got a big journey to go until we are able to work at the chaotic system level. And so there's an enormous journey for even those of us who've been doing this for 30 years. Still recognise we're still at the beginning of our very long journey. There's an immense amount to learn here. And in the work that we've got a current major research project looking at coach maturity, and one of the things that's come out from our previous work around this subject over the last 20 years is that if you are a coach that's really a beginner coach, you're focused on process, you've got your grow model or whatever, and you haven't grown how to grow yet, and most people do as they grow. Then you think about your mindset is, I've got a client, they've got a problem, and I'll create a solution for them. Then if you get a bit more mature and you've got a bigger portfolio, you're able to relax. Instead of doing coaching to somebody, you do coaching with somebody. Then you've got this mindset that, okay, the client, they've got a situation that we need to explore, so we're starting to get into the simple systems here. Then what are their values they apply, and then maybe we'll find a solution. But then you go even further than that. You go into the point where you integrate who you are as a coach and what you do as a human being, and now the things change as well. You start off with the client. You get to understand their values, then the context, which works. So we're moving from simple systems to more complicated systems. Then you look at the coaching relationship, and finally you find emergent ways forward rather than a simple solution. And then if you become at the highest levels of maturity we've been able to identify, you start off before anything else by seeing the client in their system. And before you've got that understanding, you can't go anywhere. And then you work on the coaching relationship. Then you create the emergent ways forward, and the client develops the emergent questions that will actually shape their thinking and their actions in the future. Now, moving from this is just one-to-one. When we get into team coaching, everything is multiplied by however many. I'll make a number up, 10 times in terms of its complexity and its difficulty. But with this mindset of systemic thinking, starts on a journey that gets increasingly more towards the complex and the chaotic. Now, Tracy, I love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm interested also as to how. So some of the work that I do, a lot of the work I do in systems work is also that layer of history. So where do some of the dynamics emerge from? And that's also another way of seeing systems. Seeing that historic context. Where has the previous trauma in the organisation been, or what's the dynamic that's turning up that's a hidden loyalty, for example. And looking at some of those can be absolutely fascinating. And getting people to acknowledge those, to kind of unhook them from some of those unhelpful dynamics. It's quite a different way of working, because your relationship is with the system rather than primarily with the individual or the team. And that's a strange place to be as a coach sometimes. Yeah, and I think that's part of the complexity that you're talking about. And I'm not sure I have any, great wisdom, nice, tidy way of putting that. Maybe it's because it's chaotic. But it's something that really shifts people, when they can just acknowledge some, hurt in the past or some dynamics that's kind of pulling them. And when they get that release, it's just extraordinary. I'm not just blown away by it, really.
But a great illustration of that is to ask somebody to begin with, where is the pain in you?
Yeah.
And then working with the team, where is the pain in the team? But then where is the pain in the system as a whole? And to see the map of where people are feeling pain across the whole system gives you a lot more levers, because you can suddenly see, if I can help relieve the pain of other people or other parts of the system, that's likely to have a positive effect on my part of the system. And so so just focusing on pain is just one of the key tools that we have.
Yeah. And I love doing, you talked there about mapping. It's one of the tools I use all of the time. It's just getting people to non-verbally map out their team dynamic, and taking people away from talking about it takes them out of their storytelling. We all have stories about our team. We're great or we're terrible or we're whatever, and just getting people to stand where they feel is true in relation to each other. It's amazingly powerful, just the kind of amount of information that starts to emerge, and people don't have to explain it. It just is, and that's a lovely place to start. Really
so the intuitive when we can develop the team's intuitive understanding, then they're beginning to be able to do this for themselves. And of course, we one of the things we're trying to do with team coaching is to enable the team to make us obsolete, to be able to coach itself, and to develop the tools, the procedures, the ways of thinking that enable it to tackle its future issues from its own resources. So it's building capability and capacity, rather than just addressing a performance issue.
Absolutely. We should always be trying to do ourselves out of a job. That's one of the weird things about being a coach. And I learned that early in my career, because I started as a social worker, and that was what we always used to say. We say, if I could make a system that didn't need social workers, then I'm a success as a social worker. It's kind of the same as a coach. If our systems were so healthy that we didn't need coaches, that would be awesome. We'd all need new jobs, but that's okay. We'd find one.
Yeah, we can figure something else out.
Or we could.
So you folks have answered two of my questions, okay? Which was the what. I think we've got a sense of the what. And I was about to get to the why. And the why from a lens, a dual lens. The person who is, the buyer or the person contracting for this service, and the coach who's offering this. What makes systemic coaching, team coaching, so powerful for a coach, and let's say for a leader upon it?
I'm just thinking that the best way to answer that. The key is that as a leader, it's no longer possible to perform or to deliver the goods on your own. The days of the heroic leader are gone. We have to have collaborative work. We're moving inexorably away from concentration on individuals to concentration on the team and teamwork, and that includes rapidly forming teams. So in a lot of cases, we're going to teams that may only last a short period of time, but people come together and they've got to behave not like a committee, but like a real team to produce results. There's a lot of work to be done that, and it needs very often the support of coaching to enable that process until people are in an organization are all able to come together in that way. But we did a little survey last year, and we asked HR directors, we asked business leaders, and we asked coaches. So what do you think? Where do you think the balance needs to shift between focus of reward and recognition and focus of development, versus on individuals versus collective, the team? And overwhelmingly, people said, no, it's got to shift quite dramatically towards much more attention and focus and investment on the team. Mm. But and the majority of coaches agreed with that. But the proportion of coaches who saw that was lower than the proportion of HR directors and leaders. So we have some catching up to do.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was, David? Why do you think coaches didn't see it so much?
I think it's because so many coaches still haven't got to grips with systemic thinking at all. So they're still thinking in linear terms. So it's this client problem solution mode. That's not, you're not. So what's happening is that our clients are becoming better adjusted more quickly to the external world, or the rapidly evolving world, than many coaches are.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, a challenge. How are we going to be evolving in our practice and our ability to see and work with systems at least as fast, if not faster, than the people that we're working with?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I also want, the reason I asked too was because I have a suspicion that coaches are slightly scared of doing coaching.
Yeah.
And
rightly so.
So why don't we do this, Kathy? I'm just going to butt in here and I'm going to take help of Kulshum. Kulshum, could we just set up a quick poll? We have 77 people on the call, right? Let's just have a quick poll on, your comfort versus discomfort with systemic team coaching. Let's see where it takes us. Let's have a little bit of a check-in. Can you do that?
Sure, would you just give me a moment, please?
Great. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, or maybe Soundarya, if you're there, you could set up the poll as well. So while it comes, we can carry on the conversation, but do let us know to see, whether what we're saying, how well it's reflected here in this very moment, in this group.
Yeah.
Because I do think, team coaching is complicated. Just in it, particularly if you approach it as if you were an individual coach. I remember when I first came to it, you kind of thought to yourself, I've now got 10 individual clients and I have to service all these individual clients, and then I have to service all the relationships between all those individual clients. And then the relationships between, the little subgroups, and then the managers and the other levels. And it was like, whoa, that seems really complicated. And it's not until you step back to take that larger systemic view that actually that becomes more manageable.
Yeah.
Because you're not looking at the individual. But you have to be able to stop looking at the individual in order to be able to step back far enough to have a better view.
Yeah. When you work at one-to-one with somebody, there's a certain amount of exposure and a sense of, you can get a threat from within the individual relationship. When you're in front of a team and they're all looking to you to solve their problems for them, and it can be extremely lonely. It can be a very frightening place. And one of the things that happens to every team coach as they fairly early in their career in team coaching is they find that they've got a disunited team, a bunch of people who basically are in conflict, and they're looking to you to sort out the conflict. And then suddenly they all become united. They are at one for the first time, probably in a vast amount of time. And the reason they're all united is they're all out to get you. So they're blaming you for everything that's going on. They've found a scapegoat and you're in the middle. And as a team coach, you have to be able to work with that and have the strength and the broad shoulders to work with that and to be able to turn it round back to the team. And when you get to that point, you've always got these get out of jail free cards, which basically say to the team, so what do you think's going on here right now? And then once we've named what's going on, So what would you like to do about it? Because it's your team and your problem. So how would you, and it's that ability, the confidence to step back and do this, the toolkit to be able to be able to cope with the ultimate messiness. We were saying earlier, just before we started, the analogy that we've been that I quite like is the team brings you in expecting you to drain the swamp for them, and you say, no, I can't. I'm not going to drain the swamp. I'm going to teach you to swim.
And I think there's a sense in which sometimes with teams, it can be really useful to name the role that they are trying to put you in. So if they parentify you, for example, which is quite a common one, and asking them about, why do we need somebody to play that role? Who would usually play that role, or who's missing that has played that role in the past? So why is it suddenly landing on me? I only arrived 5 minutes ago, and suddenly I'm the cause of your problems? That's interesting. Who else has had that happen to them? Because often what you'll find is, of course, if that's being projected on you, it's been projected on someone else in the past as well. So that, again, but you have to have that ability to step away and not feel it as a personal attack. And that's probably that maturity that, David, you were talking about before, is just being able to step back a little bit and go, now that's interesting. What's going on here? And maybe this is not about me. What's the system trying to do here? What is this dynamic that's turning up? And figuring it out, because there isn't a right answer, and being able to help the team to work out how do they figure out what's going on in their team. Because that's the service, isn't it? You're helping them to learn to coach themselves.
Yeah. Should we have that poll before we move on?
Yes. I'm just trying to type it out here. Kulshum, I think, can I go ahead?
Vijay, I've got the question, Vijay.
Okay, awesome. So why don't you launch that?
Yeah, just give me one moment. Tanmay is launching it. You just want me to put a yes or no?
Yeah. It's okay. I mean, we don't have to be very accurate just to get a sense.
It's up now.
Yeah. So just requesting all of you to, just take a stab at it. Is anything coming in, Kulshum?
Yeah, we're getting answers.
Yes, Vijay, as you can see on the screen, we have around 46 votes. Very close tie between yes and no, 55 and 44%.
And of course, we might be, because of the topic of this particular session, we're probably not representative of people who aren't interested. So they won't, they might not be turning up. But it's interesting, isn't it? Just this thinking about how comfortable we are. And also, of course, just that whole word about comfort. I don't think I go into team coaching particularly comfortable. I enjoy it, I get a lot of joy out of it. But comfort is probably not the first word that would come into our mind.
Yeah.
So we're closing at yes with a 57% at this point of time.
Okay, so that's so it's about a 50-50 then, right?
That's good. Yeah, it's good.
Right.
I think it might be a good thing at this point, just to do a little bit of definitional clarifying, if you like. We're talking about systemic as if it was just one thing, but there are multiple levels of systems, and if you think about it as the if we're working with a team, and we've got there's a problem inside the team. Two people are in conflict, for example. If we take a simple systems approach, we look at how do we help them to get on together. If we take a more a systemic approach, we look at what are their stakeholders' involvement is? How can the stakeholders help? But we've got a layer beyond this, which is increasingly important, which is complex adaptive systems thinking. So nothing stays the same. And the simplest way of explaining that is that it's what are the interconnections between the stakeholders that create the situation where conflict is likely to occur between these two people. So what we're increasingly seeing is we need to, as we progress and become more effective as team coaches, we need to leave behind just thinking systemically and move to thinking in a complex, adaptive systemic way. And the great thing is that you if you focus on the latter and getting to a complex, adaptive systems approach, you pick up all the systemic thinking on the way.
Yeah, I think that was a great example, David, because sometimes we can really be at a level that we may not even be aware of, right? So sometimes I remember this one engagement, and it wasn't even an engagement; it was a situation where it wasn't even a formal team, but there were people who had to sort of rally around together to deliver a result. And so a very narrow approach would be to say, no, this is not a system, right? But I think, it's there. It's there in your face that these are people who have to come together to deliver that result. So the challenge even begins there, right? There is no established identity. And despite an identity, still all of that stuff is happening. And imagine a coach going into that situation. Right? Yeah. There is no sanction, there is no authority, but that these are the parts that need work.
Yeah. And there's a challenge here, I think, that we could come in with a consultant mindset. We're going to fix the system. And if we do that, we're taking away control from the team. Our objective is to enable the team to understand, have greater clarity about all its dynamics, so it can make the decisions about how it will evolve and develop. But the moment that we start to take charge, we've lost the role of coach.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
So, Kathy, is there an example from your recent work where you can talk about? I know you said once you start working like this, very difficult. There's a risk of not being able to go back to any other way. But if you go back, let's say, to your early days in coaching, between, let's say, the way a one-on-one coach would approach a situation versus, a systemic coach.
So, if I tell you about a piece of work I did recently, and then I'll tell you what I would have done a few years ago had I had the same approach, that might give you a bit of an example. So, manager, newly in a team, team's already established, and the leader comes in, having all sorts of problems with being accused. This was her language, I'm being accused of micromanaging. I'm not, they don't understand that I have to look after their work. They've employed me because I'm brilliant at what I do. And I'm paraphrasing there, but, that was basically the kind of theme of the conversation. Now, had I have taken a one-on-one approach, I would have, she rang me as a coach, and I would have coached her around her leadership. I would have worked with her around her skills, around her attitudes, around her values, about how she was seeing herself, self-awareness, maybe a bit of emotional intelligence. That's the sort of area I would have worked on. As a systemic team coach, what I could hear was there's something going on about her position as the new leader in this team, where she's getting these consistent messages that are not really in parallel with what she's saying she's bringing. They're very competent, and I had no reason to believe she was competent. She came from a good background. So what I did was I asked her if we could get the whole team together, and we went and we did a structural constellation. So what we did is we got the whole team to map out how they were before she arrived and how they were when she arrived. And what we identified was that one of the key dynamics was that the team was still loyal to the previous leader who had left in difficult circumstances, and they hadn't been allowed to discuss it. So we discussed it, and we talked about what actually happened, and they all found out different things about what they'd been led to believe and what the story in the organisation was. And what happened immediately, it was almost like there was this big sigh of relief. And I spoke to the manager actually just last week, so this is only a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me, it's like everything's completely changed, and yet we didn't talk about the micromanaging. How come we didn't sort out the micromanaging? First of all, are they talking to you about micromanaging anymore? We went, no, they don't even say that now. In fact, they quite often come to me and ask me questions, and they were never doing that before. So it was this lovely example, and that's like 2 hours. So I would have spent months coaching her in the past.
Yeah.
Your business doing it this way, but I would have just focused on her, and it would have been a good piece of work, and perfectly useful. But the change we made was into that team, and they recognised that there's another dynamic about how we communicate. Stories we tell ourselves about what happens here. There's all sorts of little layers going on. Mm-hmm. So that's an example.
That's a great example. David, one from your work.
Well, one of the lessons from that we have is that almost every time when we're asked to come in and work with an individual or a team, and the solution, the problem that they put in front of us is almost always a symptom of the system, not the actual thing we need to work on.
Correct.
And if we don't go and investigate the system, we can spend a lot of time working on the wrong thing. And the example that immediately came to mind for me was a not dissimilar one, but this is a chief executive of a large charity, but getting towards burnout because she's taking all the responsibilities on her own shoulders. And the simple thing was put them together as a team and get her to talk about all the challenges that she faced and that she was struggling to deal with. And the team also doing the same. And one of the questions how are we helping each other, or helping or not helping each other? So what are we doing that's helping or hindering each other from making things happen? And it was not just a focus on her, it was focused on everybody in the team. And very quickly, the team said, well, we'd love to help you with that. But she said, well, I was always afraid of, I know you're all overworked. I was afraid of putting more stuff on your shoulders. And they said, no, let's share it. And so what completely changed the dynamics of that team simply by mapping out for everyone, making clear what are the challenges that they were each facing.
So what I'm picking up from what both of you are saying is, even though you might even contract for an individual engagement to work with somebody, your whole approach could be systemic, which could lead you to a whole deeper exploration with the client.
It's a progression, actually. A large proportion of team coaching assignments come about because the coach is working with the client rather.
Yeah.
Now, after a while, you then help that client to see things more systemically.
Yeah.
And they see their relationship with the team in a different way. So the starting point is basically to help the client begin to recognize how a more systemic approach would help their team to grow and for them to be the principal instrument there. When they get the confidence of the team in this process, they can then invite you in to work not just with the client, but with the team together. So it's very often a progression. Rather than saying, come in and coach this team, it often comes from the assignment with the leader.
It's an interesting one too, with when you get invited by the leader as to how the rest of the team see you. So that has to be managed sometimes a bit carefully, because team members can often see the coach as the leader's coach who's coming in to do something to us. Yeah. And so that has to be well managed, and it's just about being open and acknowledging it. And that's an important part of just that initial process, really. I'm quite lucky because now I don't do that much individual coaching, so I often when I'm not training other coaches, what I'm doing is going in as a kind of an assistant, if you like, to other coaches who might be working with teams. And I'll go in and I'll do a constellation with them because that's the work that I really love doing. And so I'm sort of aiding their systemic progression. So that's been really, it's a bit of a liberator for me. And that's just been lovely to be able to work alongside other coaches who are working in a more, maybe over a longer program. And then I'll come in and just do a particular piece of work to unpick a few things or to see what emerges, do a few experiments and see what happens. And that's been really lovely.
Yeah. So that leads me to the other one that I've been always wanting to ask David. So from what Kathy is saying, we're talking about support, we're talking about, how coaches might figure it out, in the early days as they go along. David, where does supervision fit into all this?
Well, we've seen supervision grow enormously across the world. And I think the more that coaches are serious about their practice, the more they recognize the value of supervision. Supervision helps us to step back and look at our practice, and if it's one-to-one supervision, that has lots of benefits. So does group supervision. They have different pluses and minuses, and very often the issue is cost as to which you go for. And very often people have both. But in team coaching, you've got the issue that people often work in pairs. And they work in pairs because it's such a demanding role, particularly both in terms of energy and in terms of managing and looking at the room and watching what's going on in the room, that two people really help and support each other. So you now become a team yourself, and you have to role model good teaming to the teams that you're working with. So in these circumstances, the pair of team coaches comes to supervision. And therefore, you're being supervised about how you work with the team and the role model you provide, but also about how you integrate with that team. And because it's all so messy, the supervision process helps you to find the patterns within the complexity of that mess. And so, one of the things that we immediately ask very often in supervision is, what is it to the team coaches? Is what's your role in the system of that? And when Kathy's describing coming in doing constellations work, it's inevitable that there is a role that you're taking in a narrative that comes out of that role, just from you being there. We are reagents rather than catalysts. A catalyst is not changed by it. It changes the system, but it's not changed by itself. It's changed as well. So we've got this dynamic that we need to constantly be reflecting.
David, I think I'm losing you.
Okay.
Kathy, were you able to hear the last bit?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is David's saying as well is this thing about how, as a pair of team coaches, if we are working as a pair, that being supervised together as a system, because you are a system, the pair of you, and how that is interacting with the system that you're working with, and what that dynamic is, and what you're bringing, and also, of course, inevitably, and what's going to happen when you leave? Are you going to leave it better?
Yeah.
How's that going to work?
So if systemic team coaching was, what it is, I'm wondering how it feels to be a supervisor of systemic team coaches.
Well, we've got a project at the moment, which is developing standards for team coach supervisors.
Okay.
So frameworks. We're not calling them competencies. We're being very clear about that. But they will be made available for the professional bodies to adopt. And we pulled together globally a whole group of very, very experienced team coach supervisors.
Okay.
Who are both learning about from each other, but also developing the standards for this. The big issues we're finding is there are not enough supervisors with team coach experience or teaming experience.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry, Kathy.
Go on. Yeah.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, because I came out of a profession that supervision was something that I just grew up with. I mean, it was part of what we did. And so when I went into coaching, I was actually, honestly, a bit horrified that people weren't getting supervision. And, you know, so it's always been a thing for me. And I was a qualified supervisor of social work in the social work field. So I carried it on. What I find now is, so we run some systemic supervision, which is really interesting. So we're using systemic tools within the supervision, which is good fun for the people who have trained with us because they get to kind of practice at the same time. But what we're finding is that as David says, it's about trying to get these levels of expertise with, you know, it's difficult because it's complicated. So it's, you know, how you unpick. So David, I'm actually the president of the ICF in Australasia at the moment. So with one of my other hats on, I'm very much looking forward to that work coming out because we'll be talking to you about that for sure.
Yeah, well, it's certainly throwing up some very interesting things. And on the subject of endings, we're about to do a survey of team coaches about endings of team. There's no literature that we can find whatsoever. In fact, not even very much literature about endings of coaching assignments. Full stop. David Megginson, who recently died, and I did a study nearly 30 years ago, looking at the endings of individual one-to-one coaching relationship, and we learned that one of the big things we learned was that the importance of actually having a clear ending where you celebrate and recognize what you achieve. And if you didn't have that, both parties felt negative about the relationship subsequently.
Yeah. And endings are so important. We do in constellations all the time. We're picking up where endings in organizations have been done badly, and there's something hidden, or there's something that hasn't been dealt with, or just, stories erupted about it. And endings are a real problem for us somehow. And managing them well is something that, that's such a gift we can give our clients about. Make sure these endings are good. We see it all the time in organizations, in mergers and acquisitions. I used to work with one bank, it always makes me smile, who were taken over 23 years before I worked for them as a team coach. And the day I went in and introduced myself to the team and just started talking to them, half of the team, just less than half the team, said, I'm so-and-so, and I'm from Bank of, and it was the bank that was 23 years ago taken over by the bank they now work for. And they still hold loyalty to those old banks. And guess what? Things weren't happening as they were supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
There was no proper ending for them. They had no way of closing.
Well, we will be putting out a survey in the next few weeks. Well,
brilliant.
Okay. So just shifting gears a little bit, one question that I had, and then we can take a few from the chat box that are coming up, and I think we touched upon it, but I still want to get your two perspectives on it. What would you recommend for somebody who says, okay, I'm ready, I want to learn this whole systemic team coaching thing. How do I become a systemic coach? And what would be your practical wisdom for that?
Okay, so are we talking a systemic coach or a systemic team coach?
You can actually talk about both.
Okay. Okay. I think the key, one of the key things that we're learning is that the competencies that make you a one-to-one coach are not necessarily the competencies that make you a good team coach, that you have to leave a lot of them behind. So the need to, it's a different set of competencies, but there's a growing supply of trainings for people to move from one-to-one coaching into team coaching, and the consensus around the good practice consensus is basically you start by trying to be more systemic with your team, with the team leaders that you work with. And then you can gradually move into the stages of various levels of being an effective team coach. And it doesn't matter whether it's through the in parallel with the ICF standards, which we launched this year, or the EMCC standards, which were launched last year. They're very, very similar, and for the obvious reason, and for collaboration, lots of collaboration. But in the big global program we launched with the Global Team Coaching Institute last year, with over 1,300 people signed up, which is amazing. It fits the EMCC levels, or first three levels, which are roughly equivalent to ACC, PCC, MCC, and as a team coach. And so foundation is all about helping you to really get team literate. Practitioner is about helping you to get on that ladder to be able to work with teams, preferably as a junior partner in a team coaching pair, but to go and experiment and do. And senior practitioner about really being able to, I can do this. I'm comfortable in any situation. So that's the journey. And obviously it's not a short journey, because the key is to practice and find yourself in situations where you don't know what you're going to do, or you think back and said, I really made a mess of that. But it never goes away. I've never done a team coaching assignment or 3-hour session without thinking I really could have done that bit better. So it's a constant learning journey. We will be the GTCI will be. We're just about to launch the next round of the foundation levels online, and I will be in India in June next year for from the Coaching Mentoring International program, which will be in people will actually come to be physically there.
Okay.
So it's but much more experiential. And if you're happy, I'll put a link in the chat box in a minute if you think people would like to know that. But so there's lots of routes, lots of providers. The key thing is I'll have those providers got an appropriate accreditation for the courses they're running.
Sure.
One of the things we run some training out of our academy in New Zealand. It's all online now. And I know there's a few people on the call who have worked with us. And our experiences, we start with people who are coaches, who are, already trained in coaching and usually doing individual and some teamwork, but that varies. And we give them a series of tools to try and experiment with, and then we come back and we do like supervised practice, and we work with them in that sort of way. So it's an iterative journey, the way that we're approaching it. But it's fascinating, because as we get people in, and Alison, my business partner, is actually on this call. Alison Greedo, she's there somewhere.
Yeah, I saw Alison there.
Oh yeah, and when we're training people, what we find is that people are saying, "Oh, I just went and did that thing with a client that I've been working with, and it changed our direction, or it gave them a new bit of insight." And so it's almost like it allows them to take baby steps. So that's been successful in terms of what we're doing at the moment. But it's a much more condensed sort of program than what David's talking about. I think it's just a start of the skills, and we have a lot of fun running them. But it's something we can maybe put something. I might even ask Alison to put in the chat box our link as well, just in case anybody's interested.
Yeah, sure, you can do that. I'm aware we have just a little bit of time, so and I probably think we've not done justice to a lot of the questions. Some of them have been covered in our conversation. I'm just wondering, maybe we send these to you. Would you be able to answer them, or how do we?
Of course. Okay. Yes, happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay, Kathy.
Yeah, sure. That would be absolutely fine.
Okay, so we figure a way as to how do we take this and put it out and then send it back to participants. But maybe we have time for a question or two. There's one very interesting question. This is from Vinita. What's the most important competency a coach should possess to be a systemic team coach?
Curiosity.
Yep. I would say that, and I would say awareness of systems, being able to see systems.
Okay. There's another one, right, which is about boundary, which is again interesting. Something to the effect that, where do you draw a boundary in a system?
Well, so I actually do quite a lot of work where people just spend the whole session trying to figure out the boundary, and that's the work. So, and it's really useful. It's really useful when people are trying to work out who's in and who's out in this team, for example, or in this system or in this process. And when you ask them, so particularly if I'm doing mapping, I'll ask somebody to physically do a map, and I'll say to them, where's the boundary of this system? And there'll be a big silence, and then they'll be like, I don't really know. Is that interesting to you? Yes, it is. And then you end up doing the whole conversation around boundaries, because what you've both just discovered by trying to draw one is, there's something there that's not quite sitting right. So that can be really interesting.
And if we then say to them, where is the boundary, but where does the boundary need to be?
Yeah.
That is quite fascinating. I'm taking a complex adaptive systems perspective. If you look at all the links between all of the entities, the players, the stakeholders, and the team, and simply say, well, how we're positioned here, but what would happen if we shifted ourselves to there, and became the intermediary between two stakeholders who don't normally talk to each other, but who have a big influence on us, and the impact of that on totally shifting the fortunes of a team can be vast.
Yep.
That's very, very powerful.
Look from a different place, even just getting them to just look, what do you look like from this stakeholder's point of view? Let's just wander over here and have a look, and what does that look like to you? Yeah. You can get quite a lot of insight. Really interesting.
Somebody's asking about Gestalt. That's a lovely question.
Cool.
Which one, David?
From I can't quite read it. From Senior Manager MMC. I can only read the top bit, but TD it is. How can we apply Gestalt in team coaching? And the answer is whether you're a Gestalt, whether you're trained in Gestalt or not, you're using in order to be effective as a team coach, you're using Gestalt methodologies all the time. You're using your own feelings, and very often you will reflect back to the team things that you sense in the room, and just as simple as saying, I'm sensing a real drop in energy as soon as we started talking about X. So what's going on for you there? And so that's the sense of energy reflects your loss of energy to theirs, and so and their loss of energy. You can put all this picture together and create virtually to map the energy within the room and what's driving it and taking it away. So there's lots of ways we can use Gestalt principles.
Completely big thumbs up on that, David. Because then I think this becomes even more complicated in virtual environments, right? Because it's just dynamic, and still you need to get a sense of that energy that's there, which you can't see, but you just need to perceive. I need to just say that we are nearing the end of our time, and would love for this conversation to really continue. But I just want to let our participants know that I think before we came in, we were just talking about what do we really want as an outcome. And we were quite aligned, saying that if we can just have, some curiosity about this, right, and leave people with more exploration they can do, because systemic team coaching is an ocean, literally. And maybe you need to swim your way through that ocean, and that's the best way to learn. But I think it was great that we had David and Kathy, both who have phenomenal, not just experience, but I think passionate about, and you could see it in their, the whole being, the way this conversation went. And I think, I know we had a set of questions, but I think while I think all of it got addressed, I must say, It was a beautiful navigation that just got co-created by whatever was emerging here. Thank you, everyone, for, I think, some fabulous questions and comments, observations. We'll find a way to get to all of them. And David, Kathy, any final words before we wrap up?
Just a simple summary. Sorry, Kathy, you go ahead.
Oh, you go.
Okay, we've been too polite. Yeah, team coaching is improv for teams.
Nice.
You create.
Nice one.
And my kind of plea to everybody is have some fun with it. You know, it's an experiment, and you know, be vulnerable with your clients. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you're not an expert, but you don't know everything, and that's perfect. You don't need to go in knowing everything. In fact, that will probably trip you up. So it's a great exploring adventure to go into team coaching. So I really encourage people to, if you're interested, you know, put your toe in the water, see what happens.
Yeah.
Lots of yeses in the chat box and lots of thank yous, and of course lots of stuff coming on the screen. So this is like really nice. Back over to you, Kulshan.
Thank you so much, Professor David, Kathy, and Vijay Lakshmi for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. It was definitely a very intuitive and thought-provoking inputs that was shared by both of you. And as both of you said, curiosity is my biggest takeaway, and awareness and vulnerability, as we always say, is something that I'm going to take with me. And once again, thank you to our session sponsor, Beckett McEnroy. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely evening. Stay tuned to watch the remaining sessions. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye,
all very-
everyone.